Have you ever just felt completely swamped by information? Like you're drowning in facts, but still somehow missing the actual point.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
What if the key to cutting through all that noise, to really understanding yourself and the world,
Hmm.
what if it isn't in the latest app, but maybe in texts thousands of years old?
It's definitely a provocative idea. And that's pretty much what this deep dive is all about today. We're digging into insights from a really foundational text of Indian philosophy, the Chandogya Upanishad.
Right.
And we're using a scholarly commentary to guide us.
Yeah, we've got some pretty dense sources here, a serious commentary, notes on related stuff, specific stories. It's not exactly beach reading, is it?
Not at all. So our mission really is to unpack these ancient writings, pull out the most important bits, the nuggets of wisdom, and see what they might, offer you, listening now for navigating our very modern world.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We should probably start at the source, literally. The commentary grounds the Upanishad in the Vedas, right? These super ancient scriptures.
Exactly, the foundation. You've got the Argveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharva Veda.
And they each have their own kind of focus.
Yeah, broadly speaking, Ark is more about hymns, prayers, Sama, that's melodies, chants. Yajus deals with sacrificial formulas, and Atharva covers, arts, sciences, practical knowledge, sometimes stuff beyond the main rituals.
Got it. And the Upanishad itself, it jumps right in with three core terms: Ark, Saman, and Udgitha.
It does, and it gives their identity pretty much straight away. Ark is equated with speech, Saman is life breath, or Pana, and Gita, that's the sacred syllable Om.
Om. Okay, the text puts a huge emphasis on knowing Om. Why is that specific syllable so critical?
Well, it's called the essence of the essences. The source gives this great analogy, actually.
Oh, yeah?
It compares a merchant who really knows the value of gems to, say, a forester who finds one but doesn't know what it's worth.
Oh, okay. The merchant gets a better result, right, for the same gem.
Exactly, because he knows its true nature, its essence. So knowing Om, knowing the essence, it changes the outcome of your actions.
So performing a ritual, or really any action, with a deeper knowledge plus faith and applying it correctly, that yields a better result than just going through the motions.
Precisely. It brings a superior result, the text says. It's about the informed intention, the understanding behind it, not just the physical act.
So what does that ancient idea mean for you today? In this world of endless headlines, shallow summaries, does trying to find that deeper understanding, that essence of something, actually change how effective your actions are? It sort of suggests surface knowledge only gets you that forester's price.
It really makes you question the value of depth versus just, knowing a little about a lot.
Okay, so from these basic sounds, these essences, the text moves pretty quickly to meditation, right? Upasana.
Yes, it comes up early. Because meditation is seen as a way to purify the mind, your character. And this purification, it suggests, helps to illuminate the real nature of things.
Makes sense.
And it's also presented as maybe a bit easier, practically speaking, because it gives you a substratum, something to actually focus on.
So where should you focus? The text seems to explore different options for meditation.
It does. It mentions meditating on images or maybe Brahman with qualities, but then it starts looking at other things.
Right.
Well, the mind itself, the eye, the ear, touch, taste, the sense organs, basically.
Okay.
But, and this is key, the source points out that things like the mind are described as being pierced with evil, by negative influences, personified as asuras in a story context.
Pierced with evil. So meditating on the mind means you're thinking both good and bad thoughts.
Yeah.
It's not pure.
That's the argument here, yeah. So they're kind of discarded as the ideal objects for meditation in this specific teaching, because they're pierced with evil, all except one.
Okay, which one escapes?
The breath in the mouth, prana.
Ah, breath. Okay, breath. What makes it different?
Well, the text really elevates breath, prana, as this key, pure object. There's a story mentioned, Shanaka Kapeya and Apipataran Kakasan, used specifically to praise breath, vayu, and prana, calling them Brahman. They represent that fundamental life force, which isn't seen as being subject to those same evils as, say, the interpretive mind or the easily distractible senses.
Interesting. And there's even a focus on Vyana, the breath between breaths.
Yes, exactly. That junction point between prana and apana, the incoming and outgoing breaths, meditating on that as udgitha.
And the text gives a reason for this.
It does, a fascinating one. It links meditating on Vyana to why you can speak or lift something heavy without actively breathing in or out at that exact moment. It's that steady internal breath that sustains the action.
Wow. This ancient idea, focusing attention on pure versus impure objects, It feels incredibly relevant now, doesn't it? Your mind, your senses, they're constantly bombarded. So how does focusing your attention on things like the mind pierced with evil, maybe negativity online, comparing yourself, chasing external stuff, how does that affect you compared to focusing on something more fundamental, like your own breath or a core principle?
It's a direct challenge, isn't it, to be really discerning about where we place our mental energy?
Okay, so building on that idea of focused attention, the Upanishad then dives into territory that might seem a bit stranger at first, connecting specific sounds, symbols to cosmic elements, even deities.
Right. It gets quite intricate. It uses concrete examples for meditation, like the sound R that's linked to fire.
Or for fire, okay.
And U is linked to the sun. E is connected to invocation, like calling someone, because of the word ihi, which means come.
Right. Ihai, come, makes sense.
And you get others, like Ohoyi for the Viswadevas, the collective gods, him like a hum for Prajapati, the creator. Breath itself is linked to swara, which relates to musical accents. Food is ya, connected to yadi, meaning going, because, well, food lets you move.
And speech, vak, is viraj, some kind of cosmic principle.
Exactly. So you're linking these tiny units, sounds, syllables to the big picture, the macrocosm.
It still sounds a little out there. Linking sounds to gods and food.
It does initially, but the goal seems to be establishing these really deep connections, showing everything is interwoven. There's even a meditation on the sun as Ugita because the sun utters or moves. The word used is faran.
And there's a story with that.
Yeah, a teacher tells his son to sing to the sun, reflect on its rays, and he'll gain many rays himself, which likely symbolizes prosperity, abundance, something like that.
The text also talks about Ark and Saman mingling, doesn't it? Like earth and fire or sky and air. And meditating on the actual letters of Sama.
Yes, Sa and Ama, seeing them as these elemental pairs, earth, fire, sky, air, it's very symbolic.
And then there's the person within the sun. That sounds pretty striking.
It is, described as golden, luminous, totally free from evil, golden beard, golden hair, but only seen by those with really concentrated minds.
And this person is where Ark and Saman meet.
That's the idea. And here's the kicker. The Udgatra priest, the chanter, who truly knows this person, can apparently sing out the fulfillment of desires. Knowledge brings power.
Okay, so for you, the listener, these connections, sounds to things, to cosmic ideas, maybe they feel a bit alien at first, but could looking for these kinds of deep symbolic links actually change how you perceive the world around you? Could it open up a different way of seeing how things connect?
It certainly challenges a purely materialistic view, doesn't it? Asking you to see resonance and meaning beyond the surface.
And ancient wisdom, as we know, isn't just abstract theory. It's often taught through stories. The Upanishad uses narratives to make its points clearer, right?
Absolutely. Stories make these complex ideas much more relatable, more memorable.
So let's touch on a few. There's Janasruti and Raikva, and some birds are important. Flamingos, I think.
That's right, flamingos. And specifically a bird called balaksa points the way. The source says this story is really about how you attain genuine knowledge. It's not just about being smart. It emphasizes faith, generosity. The king offers gifts, and importantly, a lack of haughtiness, of pride. Raikva, the one who knows, is just called Raikva with the cart. His wisdom isn't obvious from the outside.
And the king is told to defer to him, right? Acknowledging Raikva's deeper understanding.
Exactly. Then you have Saitakama Jabala. That's a famous one showing how crucial faith and austerity tapas are for even approaching the meditation, the upasana of Brahman.
And Upakasala's story.
Similar theme, really. Reinforcing faith and austerity, but linking it specifically to the knowledge of Brahman, Brahmavinana, often through something called the science of the fires, Agnavidya.
Okay, my personal favorite might be the story of the dogs and the Idgita. Dogs chanting for food. What's that about?
Yeah, it's definitely unique, but highly symbolic, according to the commentary.
Right.
The dogs represent speech and the other bodily organs. Think about it. They only get to partake of food after the breath does, right? Breath is primary. So they're asking the breath in the mouth for nourishment.
So it's an allegory.
Pretty much. They help the breath because they're pleased with its Vedic learning, apparently. It's a creative way to underline just how essential breath is for everything else to function. The detail about the white dog leading the chant for food just makes it stick in your mind.
So, for you listening, these stories aren't just old tales. They embody these core human qualities: faith, humility, persistence, and fundamental principles about life. What can you maybe learn about cultivating those qualities by seeing how they play out for these characters.
They offer these really practical lessons, but wrapped in rich, sometimes quirky imagery.
Okay, now we get to a really central part, I think. The nature of reality itself. This contrast between action and knowledge, the idea of being, and something called triplication.
Yes, this is core philosophical territory. The text draws a really sharp distinction between two ways of seeing things, two paths.
Okay, what are they?
One path is based on knowing the Vedic injunctions, which is all about action, performing rituals, doing your duty. This perspective is for those who see the world as full of distinctions. There's a doer, there's an action, there's a result, there's someone experiencing it.
And that view often gets tied up with attachment and aversion, right?
Yeah.
Because you care about the results, you want certain outcomes, and avoid others.
Precisely. But then there's the other path. This one is based on the knowledge of the self, and it's founded on realizing oneness.
Being one without a second. All this is self alone. Those phrases really stand out.
They're powerful, aren't they? And this knowledge kind of dissolves those everyday dualistic ideas. The main story used to illustrate this is Svitakatu Aruni.
Right. The son comes home from his studies, very knowledgeable about the Vedas, maybe a bit arrogant.
Exactly, feeling pretty pleased with himself. But his father hits him with the big question. Did you learn that teaching? The one teaching by which everything unknown becomes known.
Meaning the knowledge of the Supreme Brahman.
Right. And Svetiketu, despite all his learning, has to admit, no, I don't know that. And that's the opening for his father's deeper teaching.
What does the father teach him?
He teaches that the origin of the whole universe is being, sat. And crucially, this being isn't just some inert substance, it's sentient.
Yeah.
It's conscious.
So not like some theories of primordial matter that's just stuff.
Exactly. This directly counters those views. The text actually says, it conceived. May I become many, may I grow forth. There's intention, consciousness right at the source.
A conscious desire to create. And how does that happen?
The sequence given is, being first produces fire. From fire comes water, and from water comes food.
And the text gives that example. Sweat.
Yeah. How do you know water comes from fire? Well, think about how you sweat when you get really hot. It's a relatable physical analogy for a cosmic process.
Okay, fire, water, food.
Yeah.
These three elements.
Yeah.
That leads to triplication.
Yes. The idea is that within every living being, these three fundamental elements mix and become threefold. Everything is made of these three in combination.
Can you give an example from the text? How does that work?
Sure. Take food. When you eat food, the text says its subtlest part rises up and becomes your mind, your life breath, your speech.
Wow. So our thoughts, our breath, our words are literally made from the essence of food.
According to this teaching, yes. The middling parts of the food become bodily substances like flesh and blood, and the coarsest parts become waste, feces.
There's an analogy for this too, isn't there? Curd and butter.
Right. When you churn curd, what happens? The subtlest part, the essence, rises to the top as butter. It's similar, the text suggests, with food. The subtlest part fuels the highest functions.
And man is described as having 16 parts, nourished by food. Svesitu's father makes him fast, right? For 15 days.
Yes, drinking only water. And the result? Only one part remains nourished by the water. Svetiketu finds he can barely remember the Vedas he was so proud of knowing. His mind isn't functioning properly.
It's like that other analogy in the text, a huge blazing fire reduced to just a tiny ember the size of a firefly.
Exactly. The potential is still there, maybe, but it lacks the power to actually do anything significant, like burning. It shows how dependent the subtle body, the mind, is on physical nourishment.
So after showing this dependence, the father then teaches about deep sleep, svapananta.
Yes, and it's not just presented as unconsciousness. It's described as the living self, going to his own, merging back temporarily into the supreme being, sat.
Consciousness just ceases in that state, unlike dreams.
Right. Dreams are still tied up with cognition, pleasure, pain, karmic residues playing out. Deep sleep is presented as a return to the source, a temporary dissolution.
And all of this teaching about being, creation, food, sleep,
Yeah.
it all builds up to that ultimate statement, repeated 9 times, wasn't it?
Yes, 9 times for emphasis. Tatvamasi, that thou art.
That being, what exactly?
That refers to the subtle essence, the being, sat, that pervades everything. That's the source of everything. That is the self. That is the true reality. That is what you fundamentally are.
That's profound. And the analogy used to explain it is the salt in water.
Perfect analogy, isn't it? You dissolve salt in water, you can't see it anymore. But taste the water anywhere, top, middle, bottom, and you know the salt is everywhere, pervading it.
So being is like that. Imperceptible to the senses, but utterly pervasive.
Exactly. And you need knowledge, the right understanding to apprehend it, just like you need taste to know the salt is there.
And to get this knowledge, you often need a guide. That's where the blindfolded man from Gantara's story comes in.
Right. Someone is brought blindfolded, maybe kidnapped, and left in a totally desolate, unknown place. What do? They shout for directions, for help.
They're lost.
Completely lost. They need someone who knows the way to untie the blindfold and guide them back home.
So the blindfolded man is like the individual soul lost in the confusion of the world.
Yes. And the one who helps him is the teacher, the acharya. The teacher guides the individual back to their true home, which is the self, Brahman. The text does mention that leftover karma might delay final liberation even after gaining knowledge, but the knowledge itself is the path back.
Okay, this section really dives deep into existence itself. For you, listening, how does this idea land? That a conscious being is the ultimate source. And if your true self is this subtle essence, maybe hidden by focusing on external things, what does that suggest about your own search for who you are?
It definitely pushes you to look beyond the surface, beyond just the roles you play or the things you own.
Now, the journey of the sage Narada gives us another angle on knowledge. It's about the difference between knowing lots of stuff and knowing the self.
Exactly. Narada goes to the teacher Sanat Kumara, and he's clearly learned, immensely learned, but he's sorrowful.
And the list of what he knows is just incredible, isn't it? All four Vedas: history, mythology, grammar, math, logic, ethics, military science, astronomy, even specialized knowledge like snake charming and understanding spirits.
He's basically mastered the entire curriculum of his time, a walking library.
Yet, he's unhappy. Why?
He tells Sanat Kumara, essentially, look, I know all the mantras. I know the words, the texts, the external forms of knowledge, but I don't know the self, and because of that, I grieve.
Wow. So accumulating facts, even vast amounts of knowledge, doesn't automatically bring peace or fulfillment.
That's the core message here. So Sanat Kumara starts teaching him about what is progressively greater. He builds a hierarchy.
Okay, how does that hierarchy go?
Well, he starts with name, but greater than name is speech. Why? Because speech is what allows names and the knowledge they represent to be communicated, to be known.
Okay, speech gives form to names. Makes sense. What's greater than speech?
Mind, because the mind, Sanat Kumara says, holds both speech and name. It's where intention arises, where desire forms. You think before you speak or name something. The mind itself can even be an object of meditation as self, world, Brahman, but there's still something greater.
Okay, the source we have skips a few steps here that are in the full Upanishad, like will, thought, meditation, understanding, strength, food, water, fire, space. But it picks up again later in the sequence.
Yes, jumping ahead in the source material we're focusing on, it mentions that greater than memory is hope.
Hope. Why hope?
The world, Sanat Kumara says, is essentially tied together by the rope of hope. Think about it. Our actions, our plans, our looking towards the future, it's all driven by hope for something.
True. And greater than hope.
Ultimately, greater than hope is spirit, prana, life, breath.
Prana again. Why is that considered greater than everything else, even mind and hope?
The argument is quite direct. When the spirit, prana, leaves the body, what happens? The body is inert, lifeless. It can't react, can't function. Sanat Kumara uses this stark image. You could burn the body and it wouldn't respond.
So prana is the fundamental prerequisite for everything else.
Exactly. Using arguments, both negative, without it, nothing, and affirmative, it enables everything. The text concludes the spirit is the essential principle. It's the father, mother, brother, sister, because without it, those relationships, those functions cease to exist for that body.
That really flips our usual way of valuing things, where we might put intellect or ambition above just being alive.
It does. And this leads back to the concept of the true, satyam. Understanding the true, which is being, means you have to recognize and renounce the false.
What's considered false here?
Things that are merely products of words or arise from false cognition. Temporary forms, basically.
Like the classic rope mistaken for a serpent? Or seeing clay, but only focusing on the temporary jar made from it.
Precisely those examples. The form, the perceived serpent, the shape of the jar, is seen as a modification based on words and interpretation. It's considered unreal from this ultimate perspective. Only the underlying substance, the rope, the clay, which are analogies for pure being, is held to be true.
But wait, if the self is beyond words, how can words even help us understand it?
Good question. The text uses another helpful analogy. finding the king in a big parade or procession.
Okay.
You might not be able to point directly at him in the crowd initially, but you can point out everyone who is not the king. Not him, not her, not that one. By eliminating all the false identifications, you indirectly guide attention to the king.
So words work by negation. By clearing away misconceptions about the self, they point towards what remains.
But that's the idea presented here. They function indirectly.
And Sanat Kumar's teaching builds towards bliss. Bhuma, the great.
Yes, Bhuma the Great. It's described as the state where one sees nothing else, hears nothing else, understands nothing else.
Nothing else, meaning
No perception of separation. Contrast this with the finite, the ordinary state where you do see, hear, understand other things as separate from yourself. That finite state is mortal, subject to change and death. But the great, Bhuma, is immortal, and it's not based on anything external, it's based on one's own greatness, which is the self.
So it's like a state of total unity, non-duality.
That seems to be the implication. A unified consciousness where the subject-object distinction collapses. Narada's journey concludes with this idea. Once impurities like attachment, aversion, all that stuff, are washed away through knowledge, dispassion, and dedicated practice.
Then what happened?
Then the teacher Sanat Kumara, who is also called Skanda in this context, shows the purified disciple the way beyond darkness to the absolute truth.
Narada's story is such a powerful lesson, isn't it? That just piling up information isn't the path to wisdom or peace. For you listening, what does Narada's journey make you think about your own pursuit of knowledge or happiness? Is there maybe a greater understanding you've been overlooking?
It really forces a reevaluation of what constitutes true wealth, true knowledge.
Okay, so the Upanishad then brings this cosmic understanding right down into the individual. Locating the self within us. It talks about the body as the city of Brahman.
Yes, this beautiful metaphor. The body is the city, and within the city there's a small palace.
Which is?
The heart, described poetically as being shaped like a white lotus.
And inside the palace, the heart.
Inside the palace is a small inner akasha, a subtle space, and it's what is within that inner space that should be sought and understood. That's where Brahman resides within the individual.
So Brahman is present right here in the heart.
That's the teaching. Brahman enters the body as the living self, the jiva, primarily to manifest names and forms. And this Brahman, in the space within the heart, can be apprehended or perceived by those who practice sense withdrawal, detachment, and disciplines like celibacy and truthfulness.
And the qualities of this self, this Brahman in the heart, are pretty amazing, right?
Absolutely. It's described as free from evil, free from aging or decrepitude, free from death, free from sorrow, even free from hunger and thirst.
And it possesses true desire and true volition. What does that mean?
It means its desires and intentions are infallible. They are inherently capable of fulfillment because they arise from the truth, from being itself. This is contrasted sharply with our ordinary desires and willpower, which the text says are beset with untruth.
Beset with untruth, meaning they're based on false ideas or aimed at temporary things, so they lead to frustration.
That seems to be the implication. Our everyday longings for specific external objects, people, experiences are not these true desires.
So where are these true desires?
They are inherent in the self, within that heart space, but they are often hidden by the untruth. Hidden by our ignorance, by our constant focus on and longing for external, fleeting things the text mentions. Women, food, clothes as examples.
And there's an analogy for that too.
Yes, the analogy of people walking back and forth over a field where treasure is buried, completely unaware of the riches beneath their feet. Their focus on the surface, on the external, keeps them from realizing the true wealth within.
That really makes you pause and think about what we're all chasing.
Doesn't it? And interestingly, the text even grounds this subtle reality with a physical detail. It mentions the arteries spreading out from the heart contain substances of different colors, brown, white, blue, yellow, red, linking them to the body's humors like bile, phlegm, blood, and heat.
So even this incredibly subtle inner space isn't totally disconnected from the physical body.
Not in this particular description, no. It shows an integration.
Okay, so beyond understanding this core reality, the text also talks about practices, paths, ways to achieve this knowledge. Celibacy, brahmacharya, seems to get a lot of praise.
It really does. It's put on par with major spiritual practices like sacrifice, yajna, and worship, ishta. It's even given this interesting name, anashakyana, which implies an indestructible fasting because the self attained through it never perishes.
And it's linked to reaching these almost mythical-sounding places. An ocean path, a special lake, the unconquerable city of Brahman, a golden hall.
Yes, the symbolic locations represent the high state attained through this discipline. It's presented as pretty fundamental for serious seekers of
The
self-knowledge.
philosophy of fires also gets mentioned again.
Briefly, yes. Concepts like seeing Pardanya, the rain cloud, as a fire, with air as its fuel and the cloud itself as smoke.
And the Vaishnava self-meditation, seeing the cosmos as a giant person.
Right. The universal self, where the head is the brilliant heaven, the eye is the sun, multiform, the breath is wind, etc. The idea is that making offerings, oblations, satisfies these different cosmic aspects or deities that constitute the whole.
Then there are the Vyartis, bu, buva, sva, those sounds.
Yes, their origin is traced back to Prajapati meditating on the different regions in Vedas, and their practical use is mentioned in rituals, specifically Vyarti Homa, for expiation, fixing mistakes made during a sacrifice.
Like if you messed up the Rig Veda part, you'd offer busvaha.
That's the specific example given, yes, to mend the defect related to bar.
The text also lays out different paths souls might take after death, doesn't it? Depending on how they lived and what they knew.
It does. There's the path of the divinities, or Divayana. This is for those who meditated properly on the true Brahman, often understood as Hiranyagarbha or Saguna Brahman. They travel upwards through stages like flame, light, day, the bright lunar fortnight, the northern solstice, eventually reaching the Brahman region, Satyaloka, from which there is no return.
Okay, that's for the knowers. What about others? People living more conventional lives.
For those who focused on sacrifices, public works, charity, the typical duties of a householder living in a village, there is the path of the fathers, Pitriyana.
And where does that lead?
This path goes through smoke, night, the darker lunar fortnight, the southern solstice, eventually reaching the moon.
The moon, and then what?
They enjoy the results of their good deeds there for a time, but then when that merit is exhausted, they have to return. They descend back to Earth, becoming associated with space, air, smoke, cloud, rain, and eventually become food, like rice, barley, plants, seeds.
They become food.
Yes. And then they are eaten, and through that process, they enter into a father, then a mother, and are reborn into the world. The text mentions 3 origins for birth: from an egg, from a living being, womb, or from sprouting roots plants.
That's quite a cycle. What about people who did really bad things?
The text notes that those who committed extremely sinful acts might face a different outcome, potentially being reborn as very low forms of life, like insects, or maybe even just rice or barley. Interestingly, the source suggests their exit from that state might actually be less difficult than for those returning from the moon who still carry strong karmic attachments and desires.
Mhm. And does consciousness remain through all this?
The source material indicates that consciousness, tied to past impressions and tendencies, remains in a kind of dreamlike state during the transitions, like passing through the smoke or light paths. However, the nature of consciousness, while embodied as, say, a plant undergoing cutting or processing, is presented differently. It's a subtle point, and we should just report how the commentary describes it.
Okay. And finally, there's a brief mention of the story of Indra, Virochana, and the person in the eye.
Yes, another teaching story from Prajapati. The pupils, Indra, representing the gods, and Virochana, representing the demons, are initially taught about the self they see reflected in the eye or in a pan of water.
And they misunderstand.
They mistake the reflection for the true self. Virochana leaves satisfied with this superficial understanding, thinking the body is the self. Indra has doubts. Prajapati then uses illustrations, like having them adorn themselves and look again, showing that the reflection changes as the body changes. It's affected by the body's condition.
So the reflection isn't the unchanging self.
Exactly. The story highlights just how difficult it is to distinguish the true, underlying, unaffected self from the physical body and its appearances or reflections. It's easy to get confused.
It really underlines that challenge of mistaking the temporary for the real, the eternal. You know, thinking about all these complex ideas, the discipline needed, the cycles of rebirth, the difficulty of true self-knowledge, how do these ancient views maybe challenge or echo your own thoughts about life, death, purpose, self-improvement?
They certainly offer a profoundly different framework for understanding existence compared to many modern viewpoints. It's a lot to take in.
Definitely. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, let's just revisit a couple of final concepts that came up. The name of Brahman as Satyam again, truth.
Right. And the breakdown of the syllables was given as significant. Sa represents the immortal principle. Ti represents the mortal. And Yam is what joins or controls both. Knowing the meaning behind this name, Satyam, is said itself to lead to heavenly regions.
And there was that brief but really mind-bending point about dream versus waking reality.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The text suggests that the mental forms you experience in a dream are actually real while you are dreaming them. They have a subjective reality.
Okay.
And conversely, from the perspective of dream cognition, the objects you perceive in the waking state could be seen as potentially unreal, or at least having a different kind of reality.
So it's not just dreams are fake, waking is real. It's more relative.
It points towards that, yes. But the ultimate point the source makes is that the truly unreal thing, from the highest perspective, is the perceived form itself, whether in dream or waking. Because form is seen as a product of naming, of false cognition imposed upon the underlying reality. Only pure being, Sat, is considered absolutely real.
Yeah.
It really messes with our common sense assumptions about what's solid and true.
It absolutely does. And finally, the concepts of service, nishta, and action, kriti, were mentioned near the end.
Yes. Service nishta in this context was defined specifically as devotedly attending to a qualified teacher and maintaining devotion for acquiring the knowledge of Brahman.
So dedication to the learning process and action, kriti.
Action here wasn't just any action. It was defined specifically as controlling the senses and concentrating the mind. Inner discipline.
So that kind of inner work enables the service, the devotion, and ultimately the understanding.
That's the connection made. This kind of focused inner action, Kriti, is something that should itself be sought out and understood because it's a necessary means. It brings it right back to the practical effort involved on the path.
Right. So, wow. We've really journeyed through an incredible landscape of ancient thought today, haven't we? Guided by this commentary on the Chandogya Upanishad. From the deep meaning of sounds like Om to meditation practices, the very nature of reality, the power of stories, finding the self within your own heart, and different paths and practices.
It's a lot. But at its absolute core, running through all of it, is that profound, central, repeated teaching. The deepest reality, that subtle essence underlying everything, is the self, and fundamentally that thou art, tat tvamasi.
So here's maybe a final thought to leave you with. If that true self, as described in these ancient texts, is inherently free from sorrow, free from hunger, free from thirst, and possesses these infallible true desires, what does that perhaps suggest about the nature of the everyday desires and the suffering that you experience? Maybe, just maybe, the deep fulfillment you're looking for isn't found by adding more external things to your life, but by uncovering something essential that's already fundamentally you.
Definitely something to sit with, a powerful thought to end on.